Welcome to Deep Water. This talk is for people who are not yet members of Extinction Rebellion, and also for groups who would like to consider working alongside us. My name is Linda, and together with Ned, we'll be delivering this talk. If you are a member of XR, you can find out more about our Deep Water campaign by going to XR Deep Water on YouTube and watching Tell Us More, which is the 5th in a series of short talks. This talk will cover the impacts and causes of flooding, the science behind our extreme weather, what XR is all about and how to join us, and we'll tell you about Deep Water Rising, our action for COP26. But first, a little bit about XR's Deep Water. We are an outreach and action campaign group aiming to highlight the government's failure to address the causes of extreme flooding. And just as importantly, we create partnerships and recruit new rebels by helping people to make the connection between global heating and the extreme rainfall that we are all experiencing. We have found that this talk can bring up lots of different thoughts and feelings, and it's important that we remember that we are dealing with this together. And together, we demand that the government and those in power act now, because this is an emergency. There really isn't a moment to lose. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging that some of you may have experienced being flooded or know someone who has, and just how devastating that can be. Your insights and experiences are valuable to us, and we hope that we can all work together to demand urgent action on the climate emergency, because this is the root cause of our extreme flooding. Global instances of heavy rain and flooding have risen dramatically over the last decade, with some scientists finding the rise as high as 50% across the world. In this first section, we're going to concentrate on the human impacts of flooding in the UK. But it's important to remember that flooding has a devastating impact on people, wildlife, agriculture, and food security across the globe, and that people in parts of the global south are bearing the brunt of extreme weather events, including devastating floods. And here in the UK, we are also experiencing more extreme flooding. A recent Met Office report warns that extended periods of heavy rain here are now 7 times more likely because of global heating than they were in 2013-14. And in the latest annual Met Office State of the UK Climate Report, published the 28th of July 2021, 2020 was the first year to figure in the top 10 for rainfall, heat, and hours of sunshine in records stretching back a century. You might be familiar with some of these images from recent news headlines. And here are some more. There are even more, but we don't have space to cover all of the extreme rainfall events in July 21. The point is that we hear about the ones that are on our doorsteps in the UK, Europe, and the US, but sadly, the fact is that these events are competing for headlines, and as they increase in severity and frequency, there's just too many to cover. They only make the news if the loss of life is great, or if they have videos that show something drastic or unusual happening, such as the tube floodings in China, or more recently in New York. Many global heating-driven extreme weather events, such as heat waves, heavy rainfall, and coastal flooding, are highly likely to get more extreme, both in frequency and intensity, leading to greater loss of life and increased damage to infrastructure. Hurricanes become stronger and more damaging as warmer oceans result in more powerful storms, with higher wind speeds and bigger storm surges, as recently seen in the United States. The intensity of the most severe storms is projected to increase by the end of the century by 85% globally and 136% in the Atlantic basin. In addition, changes in the jet stream are causing storms to stall in one place, causing even greater devastation. If greenhouse gas emissions continue to increase, worldwide, 340 million or more people living in coastal areas will be threatened by flooding by 2050. And in the UK, the climate emergency is expressing itself as flooding, catastrophic, life-threatening flooding. But in fact, what we are all dealing with is a disruption of global weather systems. In other parts of the world, they are facing the loss of normal wet seasons, causing droughts, crop failures, and runaway fires. And flooding can result from sea level rise, storm surges, reservoir collapse, river flooding, and flash flooding. The most significant source of flooding today is river flooding, contributing 40% of total UK expected annual damage. Coastal flooding contributes 24%, surface water 20%, and groundwater 16%. But before we go any further, we're going to look at what it's like to be flooded. And for anyone who hasn't had to deal with flooding firsthand, this part can be quite shocking because flooding has deep and long-term impacts. Repeated flooding even more so. Being flooded is a matter of survival. Everything about your life can be disrupted and destroyed, and it can take years to regain some semblance of what was once considered to be normal. And some parts of your own life will be lost forever. The impact of flooding is destructive, terrifying, and life-threatening. We're now going to look in detail at some of the impacts of flooding. The immediate impacts may be that people may drown through underestimating the depth of the floodwater, driving into water, or being swept away. It may be injured by collapsed, unstable buildings and roads and hidden debris in the water. They could have electrical injuries from damaged but live power cables and infrastructure. Fractured pipes and storage tanks can explode, and burning propane can spread flames across the surface of the water. They may suffer from hypothermia, and they can be affected by failed infrastructure such as roads, bridges, rail, gas, electricity, and clean water. The medium-term impacts include that the floodwater will be contaminated from sewage, chemical overspills from factories, and farm effluents. People have died from carbon monoxide poisoning from using generators to clean up in unventilated spaces. House fires can be caused by lit candles. Communicable diseases may be spread in emergency shelters. Contaminated water can spread disease, and vector-borne diseases can occur around stagnant and standing water. Mold in houses can cause respiratory disease, and people may struggle with animal displacement, for example, rats. Longer-term impact will be that people may develop long-term health problems due to injuries and infections, especially if they were not able to access early treatment. Mental health problems can result from the experience of being flooded. There may be social disruptions such as crime and looting. Infrastructure damage can affect travel and access to amenities and work and school. People who have been flooded are likely to experience poverty. Their house value will be down, and the house may well be uninsurable. They may have lost cherished items and pets. And the cost and time that it takes to repair homes may mean that they are in temporary accommodation for many months. And they may feel a real sense of loss of community in an area that has been devastated by flooding. And don't forget, flooding can happen more than once.
Pictures filmed on a drone show flooding up to the roof of Kevin and Catherine Lorriman's bungalow in the town of Snaith.
It's just been heartbreaking. We're going to have to demolish, I think. So that's gone. We're up to the gutter line, as you've said. And, you know, it's just, I can't even explain.
This video showed people experiencing floodwaters from the River Aire consuming their homes in Snaith in Yorkshire. Days of rain had left an area of the size of Lake Windermere underwater. I just want to emphasise that fact. There is a fourfold increase in psychological distress and suicide rate, 13.8% higher than pre-disaster rates. These mental health impacts may be from physical health problems, personal losses, social disruption, and economic hardship. Imagine knowing that it's going to happen again and again and again. Let's just pause to take that in. This has probably been uncomfortable listening, but flooding is climate change. In the UK, extreme and prolonged rain is our equivalent of the horrendous forest fires and devastating droughts that we've seen in other parts of the world. We've followed those horrors on the news and failed to see our own. After all, rain's normal in the UK, isn't it? And the appalling thing is that it is entirely down to us. And now Ned is going to look at the truth about the climate and ecological crisis.
Because the thing is, they're all connected. Because atmospheric warming is disrupting the water cycle. Drought, extreme rainfall, prolonged rainfall, extreme snowfall, rising sea levels, stalled weather patterns, they are all connected to that disruption. The intensity of rainfall depends on how much water the air can hold at a given time. Rising air temperatures increases the evaporation rate, so our oceans release more water vapor into the air, and air can hold up to 7% more moisture for every 1 degree centigrade of temperature rise. February 2020 was the UK's wettest February on record in a series dating back to 1862. England, Wales and Northern Ireland all saw their wettest February on record, with Scotland seeing its second wettest. Rainfall was more than twice the average quite widely across the regions. Some areas, including Lancashire and West Yorkshire, which is where I live, recorded more than 3 times the average. And locally, some areas saw more than 4 times their normal February rainfall. Dr. Mark McCarthy, head of the Met Office's National Climate Information Centre, said, "We have seen a number of exceptionally wet winters in the last decade, and due to climate change, we expect UK winters to become wetter." Of the top 10 wettest winters, 4 have occurred since 2007 and 7 since 1990, whilst there has been a 17% increase in the total rainfall from extremely wet days. What were recently regarded as rare flood events likely to occur once every 50 or 100 years are now becoming the new normal, thanks to global heating. This map shows the areas of England at risk from river and tidal flooding. But remember that any location with a largely impervious surface, such as an urban area, is at risk from flash flooding. Flooding has always been an occasional part of life in the areas shown on the map, but experts warn that climate change is worsening the situation. In early 2019, Environment Agency Chairwoman Emma Howard-Boyd said that some communities might eventually have to move entirely. She added that we can't win a war against water by building away climate change with infinitely high flood defences. More than 3,400 of England's high consequence flood control measures, that's defined as those where there is a high risk to life and property if they fail, were judged to be in such bad condition they were almost useless. And that's from the Environment Agency. Government calculations compare the cost of flood defences with the value of what is being protected. So to be funded, flood defences must avoid £8 worth of damage for every £1 spent. But in practice, that means that cities with dense populations and high economic values, they benefit, whilst rural areas with fewer homes and businesses do not. And in fact, damage to farmland isn't even factored in at all. There are 520,000 properties in England in areas at risk from coastal flooding, and 8,900 properties are in areas at risk of being lost through coastal erosion. The total value of assets at risk from coastal flooding is estimated to be £120 to £150 billion. By the 2080s, 1.5 million properties, including 1.2 million homes, may be at risk of coastal flooding, with a further 100,000 at risk from coastal erosion. By 2100, around 1,600 kilometres of road, 92 railway stations, and 12 substations and nuclear power stations could be at risk from coastal erosion or flooding. Most flooding occurs due to sea level rise, storm surge, rivers breaking their banks, flash flooding, and groundwater levels rising. One other, thankfully less frequent, but massively more devastating cause of flooding is reservoir collapse. Both the increased volume of water entering reservoirs and a failure to design for climate change has resulted in spillways not having sufficient capacity to release water fast enough to prevent the reservoir wall from being overtopped. The resulting overspill can destroy the dam wall and the spillway, and that can engulf communities downstream. Scientists warn that aging dams will increasingly fail as climate change makes extreme rainfall and storms more frequent and intense. This Environment Agency map shows where the sewage network discharges treated effluent, untreated effluent, and stormwater into rivers. Such discharges are permitted under certain circumstances, such as when infrastructure is unable to cope with surges in sewage and wastewater, often caused by additional flows from wet weather. Such discharges are known as combined sewer overflows, or CSOs, and that's how I'll refer to them from now on. The Environment Agency is responsible for issuing discharge permits. However, water companies are not required by law to report on all types of CSOs. In 2019, reports show that raw sewage was discharged into English rivers on over 400,000 occasions, and the same again in 2020. But this is only part of the picture. Not all discharges are monitored, and a single event may vary in length from a few hours to several days. CSOs into low or no amenity waters occurring fewer than 20 times per year require no form of event monitoring. Treating wastewater removes about 90% of microplastics, and researchers at the University of Manchester found that the poor management of untreated wastewater and raw sewage by water companies was the main source of microplastic pollution in the UK's rivers. The presence of high levels of microplastics on the riverbed suggested that water companies were also spilling raw effluent during dry spells, which is against UK and EU regulations. Add to all of this industrial, agricultural, and urban runoffs, as well as pollution from roads, and that includes dust from brake discs and tyres, toxic metals, hydrocarbons found in fuel, and other pollutants washed into the water pose a significant threat to river health. Road runoff can carry over 300 pollutants, causing short and long-term damage, including killing fish and even discolouring water, turning the rivers black in areas of heavy traffic. According to the Rivers Trust, only 14%, that is 14%, of rivers in England are considered to have a good ecological status within the Water Framework Directive. The most unpredictable and dangerous type of flooding is flash flooding. In the picture on the left, you can see that natural ground cover can allow 25% of rain to sink into the topsoil, 25% into the deep aquifers and water table, 40% evaporates or is drawn into trees and transpired, and only 10% forms runoff and travels to our drainage systems. But as you can see on the right, in built-up areas where 75 to 100% of the surface is impervious, only 15% is drawn into the ground, 30% evaporates, and 55% will run off, overwhelming our drainage systems and causing flash floods. Here you can see a map of our historic inland and coastal landfills. 1,264 historic landfill sites are located in coastal areas and estuaries at risk from erosion. 2,964 additional sites are located in floodplains. But landfill sites before the mid-1990s had few or no restrictions about what rubbish could be dumped into them, and so little is known about what they contain. But many were on the coast, and some were used to raise land levels and even used as part of flood defences. But climate change is bringing higher sea levels and stronger storms, so that is putting the old dumps at greater risk of being broken up. The Environment Agency assessed 2 landfill sites in Essex to find out the level of toxic pollutants in the waste they contained. It found large quantities of harmful metals such as lead and polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, and these are carcinogenic. The Climate Change Commission says our flood defence plans cannot be relied on to reduce the risk from coastal flooding and erosion. And this is because these plans are not legally binding and they contain unfunded proposals. Implementing current policies to protect England's coast would cost 18 to 30 billion pounds in total. The degradation and disturbance of naturally occurring wetlands is a major cause of increased carbon emissions, and yet wetlands are in the form of fen, marsh, swamp and bog have been devastated. 90% of England's floodplains no longer function properly, with 65% modified by agriculture, meaning they are smoother surfaces which are likely to be washed away and cause flash floods. 9% have been lost to urban and suburban building developments, 4% are now occupied by open water, and 6% by semi-natural woodland and rough grassland. And only 0.5% is now natural or semi-natural wetland. All wetlands are capable of sequestering and storing carbon through photosynthesis and accumulation of organic matter in soils, sediments, and plant biomass. Sand dunes, mudflats, and salt marshes, which are native to the UK, are all effective at protecting the coast from flooding and erosion. They do this by decreasing the ocean's wave energy near the coast and on land, and by absorbing excess rainwater during times of heavy rain. The UK's extensive salt marshes have been shown to reduce wave height by up to 80% and prevent soil erosion.
So what's causing this extreme weather? The Greenland ice sheet contains enough stored water to raise sea levels by more than 24 feet, or 7.2 meters, as it melts. How fast that would occur is one of the big unknowns for predicting the pace of sea level rise over the rest of the century. Glacier experts think the ice sheet was likely in balance in the decades leading up to 1990, but since then it has been losing mass at an accelerating pace. Adapted from the 2019 Arctic report card, this graph shows month-to-month changes in Greenland ice mass from April 2002 to April 2019. Each peak in the graph shows a snow mass gained during the winter. Each valley shows summer losses through surface melting and glacier thinning and retreat. The 17-year trend is estimated to be enough to have raised sea level by nearly 12 millimeters, or a half of an inch. Here is an illustration of what is happening in the Arctic. Normally, snow and ice reflects the sun's radiation back into space. The sea is darker than ice, and so it absorbs the heat from the sun, prompting more ice melt and rising sea levels. This feedback loop is why the Arctic is heating up much faster than the rest of the planet. According to NASA, the Greenland ice sheet is rapidly melting and has lost 3.8 trillion tons of ice between 1992 and 2018. A positive feedback mechanism is a small change that creates an effect that results in a bigger change. This is why the ice melt in Greenland is accelerating. The albedo effect is the ability of a surface to reflect the sun's rays. Here, you can see that snow reflects 90%, soil 40%, and the ocean 10%. Normally, snow and ice reflect the sun's radiation back into space, but as it melts, the darker soil and ocean absorbs the heat, and this causes rising surface and sea temperatures and more ice melt. And a warmer sea expands and contributes to rising sea levels. The area of ice already lost is approximately the size of France. I'll give you just a few seconds to read this slide. This polar warming narrows the temperature difference between the Arctic and lower latitudes, and this is crucial because it's a temperature gradient between them that drives the jet stream. This is a wind which streaks around the pole at up to 250 miles an hour and about 8 kilometers above the surface. The jet stream forms a boundary between the cold north and the warmer south, but the lower temperature difference means the winds are now weaker. So the jet stream now meanders more, with big loops bringing warm air to the frozen north and cold air to the warmer south. Researchers say that these changes can cause the loops to remain stuck over regions for weeks rather than being blown westward, as in the past. This blocking effect means extreme events can unfold, such as conveyor belt storms. It is this mechanism that gives us a month of rain in an hour. Climate projections predict that the type of rainfall will change. Winter rain will come from higher intensity frontal events, and summer rain will come from short-lived high-intensity rain showers. And high-intensity rain is harder for our infrastructure to cope with. A recent Met Office report warns that an extended period of heavy rain here, as in 2013-2014, when 10,000 homes were flooded, is now 7 times more likely because of global heating. Sea level rise is driven by ice melt and the expansion of the seawater as temperatures increase. This graph shows NASA satellite observations of sea level rise. Global sea level rise is accelerating incrementally over time rather than increasing at a steady rate, as previously thought. Even if we drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, staving off 2 degrees C of warming, global average sea levels could still rise between 2 and 3 feet, that's 30 to 60 centimetres, above current levels by 2100. Higher sea levels give storm surges a higher starting point, increasing their size and their reach when they make landfall. And here is an image that shows how high tides and storm surges magnify the risk of sea level rise. Development on the coast has not always taken long-term sustainability into account. Natural environments that are resilient to change have been altered by the construction of hard coastal defences. The UK is one of the most vulnerable European countries to sea level rise. 69% of GDP is located within 50 kilometres or 31 miles of the coast, and 78% of the country's population live within this zone. At present, 414,000 people are exposed to sea level rise in the UK, and many coastal communities are particularly vulnerable because populations in coastal areas are often poorer and older than the UK average. We are running out of time to reduce our carbon emissions fast enough to prevent much more damaging global temperature increases, but this still is possible if governments around the world act now with urgency. Global carbon dioxide emissions actually fell by 6.4% in 2020 due to COVID. But if we are to limit global temperatures to 1.5 degrees, we need to drop emissions by 7.6% every year until 2030. And here's the truth. We are being failed. Here is a chart which shows our likely degree of warming against various scenarios. Emissions are shown on the vertical axis and decades along the horizontal. The single green line on the left shows from 1990 to present. Our target of 1.5 degrees is the turquoise pathway. For every year we delay, this gradient becomes steeper and harder to achieve. Likewise, the 2 degrees purple line. Our pledges, the yellow line, are being overshot, and even if we met, would take us to 2.5 to 2.8 degrees. At 2 degrees, coral reefs will have been destroyed, crop yields will be decimated, and we will lose round-year polar ice. We will be unleashing devastating weather and food poverty across the globe. Our current policies, the orange band, are driving us towards 2.8 to 3.2 degrees. At 3 degrees Celsius, according to the Those rising seas would displace 680 million people in low-lying coastal zones, along with 65 million citizens of small island states. The pink band shows where we would be if no action was taken. It is unspeakable. 1.5 degrees of warming are not going to be achieved if we don't act now, as if it is an emergency. And for every year we fail, the amount of changes needed to be achieved increases. It is important to remember that the rise in global temperature is an average rise. Some parts of the planet will warm at a faster rate. The strongest warming is happening in the Arctic in the cooler seasons and the mid-latitudes during the warmer seasons. And according to NASA, some regions have already passed 1.5 degrees. Nothing has worked. Since the formation of the IPCC in 1988, we have knowingly emitted more CO2 than all of our previous emissions. And there is no sign that that is changing. The orange line started to rise approximately 220 years ago at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which is when we began burning fossil fuels on an industrial scale. And despite all of our targets, protocols, pledges, and agreements, it's just got worse. When people tell you that we are making progress, remember this graph. If this graph keeps on going up, then we are failing. No matter how many things they say they are doing, we cannot ignore the fact that we are way off track in tackling this problem. The time for words is over.
And as Banksy said, from this moment, despair ends and tactics begin. We don't have a moment to lose. Things have got to change. And the way that you can do that is to join XR. You might think, well, what can one person do? But every one of you is needed because our planet needs all of us to work together to turn things around. It's the only way it's going to happen. If we do nothing else, we need to stop CO2 emissions caused by burning fossil fuels. Everything else is secondary, because if we don't do that, then we fail. It's as stark and as straightforward as that. Because insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. So we've all tried petitions, we've supported pressure groups, we've tried writing to our MPs, we've done the marches, we've recycled, we try to shop carefully, and it's just getting worse. The truth is that our individual changes pale into insignificance against the emissions caused by our collective use of energy, our transport systems, and our methods of food production. We are made to feel guilty about what we do or we don't do, and to judge others for their lifestyles. But the people with the real power to stop climate change are failing us. Saying it is down to individuals is just a smokescreen for massive corporate greed at any cost. Our governments, banks, and fossil fuel companies are giving us empty words. We have to demand change. We have to do something different before it's too late, because it very nearly is. We need a different approach, and that approach is irreverent, honest, brave, hard to ignore, bold, determined, thought-provoking, rule-breaking, non-violent direct action and civil disobedience. Gandhi organised an Indian rebellion against British rule. Rosa Parks famously refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white person and triggered the American Civil Rights Movement. And Martin Luther King organised that movement and mobilized huge numbers of Americans to force changes to racially discriminatory laws. These people and the millions who surrounded them are regarded as heroes now, but at the time they were vilified as criminals for breaking the law. The truth is that throughout history, elites with power and money tend not to give away rights without being pressurized to do so. Think of the universal vote, women's suffrage, gay marriage rights, racial discrimination, desegregation, liberty from colonial rule, equality under the law. Think of apartheid, think of the Velvet Revolution in Eastern Europe in 1989. Civil resistance, also called disobedience or non-violent direct action, NVDA, which is Extinction Rebellion's preferred term, means normally law-abiding citizens breaking the rules and laws as a way to force change. So you might be asking, well, why haven't XR's efforts worked yet? Well, that's because there are a lot of ways that our systems don't do change. Our current electoral system, politicians, they need to be popular, otherwise they wouldn't be elected or re-elected. So any politician wanting to get elected again in 5 years won't want to bring in a long-term policy that might rock the boat. Then there's our constant demand for growth. Capitalism has two fatal flaws. It is only really interested in the present, and it ignores hidden costs that will crop up in the future. And it assumes the environment is an endless source of resources and an endless sink of waste and pollution. But that is a planet-killing fairy tale. The truth is that no matter how well-meaning one person's actions are, it will not be enough. We have reached the point where, like in our response to the COVID-19 pandemic, we need governments to give leadership and dictate the changes that we all need to make. We all have to pull together as individuals, communities, and nations. The whole world must step up and fix this. XR began in 2018 with a small group of people who were deeply concerned with the looming climate and ecological catastrophe and all that that entails. We were frustrated with the lack of truth-telling by governments and the media, the failure of action, and we were inspired by the research on civil resistance. Anyone who adheres to our principles and values is part of Extinction Rebellion, and we have 3 big, clear demands. The first demand is for the government and the media to tell the full truth about the situation we are in. That means the kind of information we've covered in the first part of this talk. The government must declare a climate and ecological emergency and work with the media and other organisations to communicate the urgency for change and for global climate justice. Secondly, we demand that governments must act now to halt biodiversity loss and reduce greenhouse gas emissions to net zero as soon as possible, in a just way, today, not at some vague future time. And thirdly, we demand that governments must create and be led by the decisions of a citizens' assembly on climate and ecological justice to decide how to act. This way, we all hear the common sense voice of the public and their actions will be grounded in real life. This man may look alone, and you may think that that is how you would feel if you joined XR. But the truth is that close by, there were supporters ready to step in if he became distressed by some of the public responses. There was also a first aider and people watching out for ambulances so that he could move if there was an emergency. There were people waiting to deal with the police if they arrived. People with his details ready to respond if he was arrested, and someone ready to sit or stand outside the police station, ready to give him a hug and some coffee when he was released. And one step behind all of that, there were trainers, legal advisors, risk assessors, artists, people doing press releases, and much, much more. He will have learned what his rights were and how to remain non-violent no matter what happened. He would know who else was doing this across the country, and they would all be getting together later to talk about what happened and relax together. The truth is that we have people from all walks of life in XR. Whatever your skills, whatever your abilities, there is a place for you. And just like this man, you will not be alone. XR is an autonomous and decentralized movement, and we have hundreds of groups working away on different things and coordinating with each other. There's no hierarchy and no bosses. It's an amazing movement to be a part of because you don't feel that you need to get through lots of layers of permissions to do something. And we want to build the kind of culture that we would like to live in, one that supports life and our own flourishing. And this includes lots of emphasis on looking after each other, building a sense of belonging, taking time to reflect and learn, and respecting our own and each other's needs and feelings. We are in this fight for a long time, and we need to help each other to be strong, because this is what we're facing. You will have seen from the earlier parts of the talk that the climate emergency is accelerating, and international governments have failed to act fast enough, if at all. Runaway climate change is just around the corner. And COP26 is incredibly important. But we know that internationally agreed targets and pledges are being overshot. And our children deserve a better future than the one that is being written for them by our leaders. The only way that we're going to be able to change this destructive path is to work together, to work alongside each other and to collaborate. The important thing is to show COP that we all stand together. And for that reason, we are reaching out to you, inviting you to join with us and together send our demand to COP26. Because this is the one where decisions have to be made, agreements have to be formed, and action has to be taken, because the time for words is over. Let no one say we stood back and didn't try. So let me tell you about our plans for COP26. We want to include everyone. So we have a digital action planned. We have actions for people to do from home and plans for gatherings across the country. No one is excluded. The digital action will be Twitter storms, emails, and phone calls. The doorstop at home action involves people with candles and pots and pans, making a noise much like the way that we expressed our support for the NHS during the darkest days of the COVID pandemic. But this time, it's for the love of our planet. And then, on the 30th of October 2021, Deepwater Rising will lead an international call to COP26. It will be a call of alarm and rage that we are being failed. And it is a demand for action. We demand that all nations, their financial institutions and industries must respond to the climate emergency now, because all life is in peril. In our race against time, we demand that COP26 follows the science and leads us to a safe place, a place that is safe for all life on Earth. So please join us on Saturday, the 30th of October for the at-home action, if that's your preference, or you can join us on the bridges. We're inviting people from all walks of life to join on their doorsteps, on beaches, rivers, bridges, reservoir walls, or in iconic locations. Our public gathering will be organised by our local XR groups, and we will tell you how to find them later. But when people gather, there will be a welcome. We might be able to share some samba rhythm drumming with you. There might be singing. There will be lights, projecting images onto buildings. We might be holding candles. But at 2 minutes to 6, there will be a silence. And then at 6 o'clock, there will be a mass pandemonium of noise from our doorsteps, church bells tolling, flood sirens wailing along the rivers, around the coast and up to Glasgow and to COP, raising the alarm and insisting that COP hears us. We will say, we see you. There is no hiding place. Do the right thing and follow the science and act now. If you want to know more about XR, you can visit the XR website for all sorts of information on our demands, our principles and values, our events, and our local groups. You can also sign up for the UK newsletter. If you've got your phone on you right now, you can take a photo of the QR code and it'll take you right to our website. And if you'd like to know more about the climate and ecological emergency and about XR, please attend a Heading for Extinction talk. You can find these talks either by visiting the XR UK website and then select the events button, or you can go to XR UK's Talks and Trainings Facebook page. So will you join us in our call to COP? Talk to us. You can find out more about our Deepwater Rising campaign here. And to see more Deepwater videos, go to XR Deepwater's YouTube channel. If you want to, you can use this talk and you can share it with others, and we can share our plan with you. Thank you for watching. Please join us and stay safe.